It has never been more clear than now that Donald Trump and every single political official who supports him is a threat to American Republican democracy. It is so clear. It's abundantly clear today. Thanks to this Supreme Court ruling, it is clear to me that Donald Trump and the MAGA movement needs to be stopped in November. These Supreme Court justices, unfortunately, cannot be voted out, so we're going to have to vote out the actual problem. The swamp, if you will. Donald Trump and his cohorts need to be removed through voting. Please vote in November. So as a result of Donald Trump's Supreme Court decision making, he has created a stacked and unbelievably corrupt Supreme Court. As you guys know, the Supreme Court basically muddied the waters of what's going on with Donald Trump's immunity case. I'm going to read you guys exactly what they said and how it relates to Trump's January 6th case so you can understand how the Supreme Court is basically allowing Donald Trump a breathing room period where he can basically, in his best chances, try to win the presidency and make this January 6th case go away. So, the Supreme Court says this: under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority. And he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all of his official acts. There is no immunity for his unofficial acts. This case is the first criminal prosecution in our nation's history of a former president for actions taken during his presidency. Of course it is. It's Donald damn Trump. Determining whether and under what circumstances such a prosecution may proceed requires careful assessment of the scope of presidential power under the Constitution. The nature of that power requires that a former president have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office, at least with respect to the president's exercise of his core constitutional powers. This immunity must be absolute. As for his remaining official actions, he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity. Now, I'm going to read a CNN analysis on exactly what this means in relation to the case, so I can make you guys as up to date on this as possible. The Supreme Court explanation of this is highly convoluted, prettied up with all of these, the Supreme Court explanation of all of this is carefully worded in a way to make it as difficult to understand as humanly possible. So we're going to read CNN's analysis of what this means and how it relates to the case involving the indictment of Trump as it relates to January 6th. Are any of the things Trump is accused of in Special Counsel Jack Smith's indictment outside of this blanket of immunity? During oral arguments in the case back in April, Trump's attorney, John Sauer, told Justice Amy Coney Barrett that multiple elements of the indictment would indeed be private or unofficial acts. These include, for instance, getting an outside attorney to organize slates of false electors. Barrett, in a concurring opinion on Monday, said she would make clear in the decision what was official versus unofficial, but the majority takes no position and wants the trial court to go through the allegations individually. Trump can then appeal whatever the trial court decides. Here's Roberts' statement. The current stage of the proceedings in this case does not require us to decide whether this immunity is presumptive or absolute. Because we need not decide that question today, we do not decide it. So here they are kicking the can down the road in their best attempt to try to, cloak Trump with this immunity while not necessarily describing what is or isn't specifically, what is given pure immunity, what's given absolute immunity, or what's given presumptive. They don't want to necessarily define that specifically as it relates to the case. However, they have said, anything done within the official scope of his job is automatically given the cloak of absolute immunity. The problem with this is a president can meet with any sort of official that he has superiority over, any of his subordinates, and conspire to do something absolutely illegal. But because the act is done under the shroud or under the protection of presidential immunity, this in theory could be allowed to take place and he can't be prosecuted for it because it was an official act. So now we go on to this. Does the majority tell the trial court what might be official or not? Trump has absolute immunity for any instructions or pressure he exerted on his acting attorney general, for instance. Plus, the court won't allow as evidence any interviews with people who worked in the administration, nullifying much of the evidence gathered by the House Select Committee that investigated the January 6, 2021 events. And it also won't let a court consider a president's motives for taking an action. Basically, they're doing everything in their power to make sure this man can get away with what he did on January 6th. Such an inquiry would risk exposing even the most obvious instances of official conduct to judicial examination on the mere allegation of improper purpose. Because to them, this is mere allegation. The accusation of trying to illegally overthrow the results of an election, to overturn the results, we're opening up the floodgates for a president to be accused or held legally accountable for anything. They're so purposefully ignorant, it's hilarious. Such an inquiry would risk exposing even the most obvious instances of official conduct to judicial examination on the mere allegation of improper purpose, thereby intruding on the Article 2 interests that immunity seeks to protect. It's an open question for the lower court to decide if Trump's pressure on then Vice President Mike Pence to disregard the 2020 election results involved official conduct. But the Supreme Court put that pressure in the presumptively immune category. This is disgusting. We accordingly remand to the district court to determine in the first instance, with the benefit of briefing we lack, whether Trump's conduct in this area qualifies as official or unofficial. The majority thinks Trump's tweets encouraging people to go to the Capitol and pressure Pence are within the outer perimeter of his official responsibilities, but they're not sure and they expect it will be challenging for the lower court to muddle through these questions. This man's tweets are considered the outer perimeter of his official responsibilities by the Supreme fucking Court. Tweets meant to overthrow to illegally overturn the results of an election. These tweets are considered the outer perimeter of his official acts by the Supreme Court. If y'all aren't getting it right now, I don't know what to tell you. I genuinely don't know what to tell you. And to back up what CNN says, here we read in the Supreme Court's official statement, in dividing official from unofficial conduct, courts may not inquire into the president's motives. So, in any other investigation of a criminal act, motive would matter. But because Donald Trump did what he did, and these Supreme Court justices are desperate to protect him from his own criminal activity, they have now said that courts may not inquire into the president's motives. Such a highly intrusive inquiry would risk exposing even the most obvious instances of official conduct to judicial examination on the mere allegation of improper purpose. Oh my God, as if any of this is obvious instances of official conduct. We all know what he was trying to do. You can pretty it up with all of these ridiculous wordings and trying to trick the American public and make it so hard to read that no one wants to read it. The man was trying to overturn the results of an election. Nothing happening here is obvious instance of official conduct. But their excuse for why they don't want it to be able for you to inquire into, the courts can't inquire into it because this highly intrusive inquiry would risk exposing even the most obvious instances of official conduct to judicial examination on the mere allegation of improper purpose. Fitzgerald 5, whatever the fuck that coding even means. Nor may courts deem an action unofficial merely because it allegedly violates a generally applicable law. Otherwise, presidents would be subject to trial on every allegation that an action was unlawful, depriving immunity of its intended effect. The Supreme Court is trying so hard to act like what's happening to Donald Trump is some witch hunt that's going to complicate the position of the presidency, instead of acknowledging, sorry, Donald Trump has engaged in unprecedented illegal activity that must be investigated. You can't just let this fly. You can come up with all the excuses you want, but we all know the truth. So, with the above principles in mind, the court turns to the conduct alleged in the indictment. Certain allegations, such as those involving Trump's discussions with the acting attorney general, are readily categorized in light of the nature of the president's official relationship to the office held by that individual. So, to break it, they're trying to make it as complicated as possible. What they're basically saying is this discussion falls within the parameters of official action, therefore it's under the protection of immunity, is basically what they're saying. It's readily categorized in light of the nature of the president's official relationship to the office held by that individual, which would be the acting attorney general. Other allegations, such as those involving Trump's interactions with the vice president, state officials, and certain private parties, and his comments to the general public, present more difficult questions. More difficult questions? Sure it does. Sure it does. The indictment alleges that as part of their conspiracy to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election, Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to leverage the Justice Department's power and authority to convince certain states to replace their legitimate electors with Trump's fraudulent slates. According to the indictment, Trump met with the acting attorney general and other senior Justice Department and White House officials to discuss investigating purported election fraud and sending a letter from the department to those states regarding such fraud. The indictment further alleges that after the acting attorney general resisted Trump's requests, Trump repeatedly threatened to replace him. I need y'all to understand how corrupt Donald Trump is. If you don't do what I want, if you don't illegally report election fraud and try to illegally overthrow an election at my behest, I will fire you. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a man who is not a leader. This man wants to be a dictator. This is how you end up with the Vladimir Putins of the world. This man, Donald Trump, really should not be in office again. The government does not dispute that the indictment's allegations regarding the Justice Department involve Trump's use of official power. The allegations, in fact, plainly implicate Trump's conclusive and preclusive authority. The executive branch has exclusive authority and absolute discretion to decide which crimes to investigate and prosecute, including with respect to allegations of election crime. And the president's management of the executive branch requires him to have unrestricted power to remove the most important of his subordinates. So even within the context of Donald Trump only removing these subordinates in an attempt to illegally overthrow an election, the Supreme Court is willing to overlook all of this and just sit there and say, well, ideally the president should be able to do this. Wake up! This is not a normal president. This isn't what normal presidents do. They know what they're doing. It's not even a matter of wake up. They're awake. They're wide awake. They know exactly what they're doing. They're co-conspirators of this criminal. That's exactly what these Supreme Court justices are. That's exactly what they are. Absolutely disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. The indictment's allegations that the requested investigations were shams or proposed for an improper purpose do not divest the president of exclusive authority over investigative and prosecutorial functions of the Justice Department and its officials. Because the president cannot be prosecuted for conduct. Now notice how they said you cannot inquire into his motives. They did this on purpose so that you would not be able to say, hey, well, yeah, him meeting and talking with these officials is legal and within his power, but why did he meet with them? For what purpose did he meet with them? And how does that purpose relate to his motive? They don't want to talk about that. That's why they cut you. You can't talk about the motives. You can't talk about why you did it. No such inquiries are allowed because God forbid you guys actually hold this man accountable for what he tried to do. So because the president cannot be prosecuted for conduct within his exclusive constitutional authority, Trump is absolutely immune from prosecution for the alleged conduct involving his discussions with Justice Department. Like, bro, oh my God. Yo. If y'all don't realize how real it is right now, I don't know what to tell you. It's serious. It was funny in 2016. It's not funny now. It's not. It really wasn't even funny back then. But I was 15 back then, so it was funny. But look, it's not funny anymore. It's demonstrably not funny. We have to stop Trump. We have to stop MAGA. It's not even a joke. It's not funny anymore. I know Orange Man bad, all of that stuff. Republicans, I'm pleading with you. Yes, he really is bad. He is. And your Supreme Court is corrupt and compromised. Lord have mercy. Like, look at this foolishness. Y'all, if this isn't clear enough, I don't know what could be. They are trying to give Donald Trump the ability to do as he pleases and cloak any and all of that. As long as he's corresponding with his subordinates and other officials, it's basically immune. He's protected. Immunity covers it all because it was an official act, regardless of whether the act was criminal and regardless of his motives into the act. Remember, you can't inquire into that. You can't do that anymore. So, there was a Supreme Court justice who dissented to what took place, and we're going to read her dissent. Justice Sotomayor. Sotomayor, writing in a scathing tone, said the court would effectively allow presidents to commit clear crimes without punishment, an expansion of presidential powers that puts democracy at risk. She and fellow liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson lay out hypothetical ways the court's ruling could create crises in the United States. The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders a Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune, 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 immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil deeds, because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That is the majority's decision today and message today. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king and above the law. Until now, presidents have operated under the assumption that their actions were not immune from criminal prosecution if they used their office and the trappings of their office to commit crimes, she writes. But going forward, presidents won't be so concerned. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. Republicans and conservatives, I'm asking you guys today to look past the culture war nonsense and tribalism and realize and recognize that our democracy is at stake. It is. Our Republican democracy is at stake. It is. And it's incredibly important for you all to realize this. This ruling needs to be overturned. The president should not be able to order any government official to do just anything, and then when it comes time to investigate that president, we cannot inquire into his motives. We can't figure out why he wanted to do it. You can't do that. So now we're left with a crime. You can't inquire into the man's motives, and if he conspired to commit the crime with another government official, it's protected under absolute immunity. So now you can't hold the president accountable legally for criminal acts that fall within the trappings of the powers of his office. So now you effectively cannot hold Donald Trump accountable for any crime, or really any president, hypothetically. You cannot hold these presidents accountable for any crime committed within the trappings of their office. Any conspiracy, anything of the sort, as long as it's done within the trappings of the powers of the office, conspired with other government officials, it's all good. If it's not clear today the importance of getting rid, if it's not clear today the importance of voting and keeping former President Donald Trump out of power, I don't know when it could ever be clearer than now. Vote blue, please. Joe Biden has to win this election. Between Project 2025 and this foolishness done by the Supreme Court, the traitors, Alito, Thomas, Barrett, Kavanaugh, all of them, traitors to the American people, disgusting. Traitors to the American people, to give the president this level of protection and then sit there and say, we're not going to decide on specifically what outer perimeter things fall within the protection of immunity. That'll be for the lower courts to decide, which will take forever to figure out. It won't be figured out before the election. The Supreme Court is absolutely corrupt, and it is disgusting what they've done. They are going to destroy this country, mark my words. Mark my words, I'm telling you. Vote blue in November. Keep Donald Trump out of office, please. It benefits everyone, Republican and Democrat. I promise you, Republicans, if Donald Trump starts wilding out with the power he's been given, you're going to regret it. Please, do not vote for Donald Trump. Republicans will not be expelled from politics just because Donald Trump loses. Please vote blue in November.